All right, I'm finished with putting on the coats of varnish on the trim on both the starboard and the port side, and I put some new varnish on the hatchway slat, the companionway slat, and on the piece of trim wood that goes on top of the companionway that allows you to lock it up. Now, I talked about at the beginning that the best time to do the varnish work is when the varnish that's on the teak is in good shape. You don't want to wait until the varnish is starting to come off in layers or in spots where you have to go all the way down to the bare wood. So the teak that I worked on was really in good shape. It still looked good, and that's the time to put a couple more coats of varnish on. Because the teak was in the shape that it was, I used a 100 weight sandpaper initially, and then after that sanding I used 400 weight sandpaper, and then between each coat of varnish that I put on I used 400 weight sandpaper. If the teak is in poor shape, the varnish that's on the teak is in poor shape, you're going to have to take it down to bare wood. And there are a few ways to do that. One is to sand it down, and you're going to have to use pretty coarse sandpaper, maybe 80 weight sandpaper. The problem with taking it all the way down to the bare wood by using sandpaper is, one, it's time consuming, but more importantly, you end up losing a lot of teak. It's really impossible to get the varnish off without taking a lot of the teak away too. And so over time, if you have to take it down to the bare wood, you're going to end up losing a lot of teak. So there's a couple of different things that I've used over the years. I have sanded all the way down to bare wood, and in addition to that being time consuming, like I said, you end up losing a lot of teak, so I don't like that technique. There's a lot of different solvents that you can use to get varnish off. What I've used, one of the things that I've used is this stripping gel, and it's supposed to be relatively non-toxic. And you brush it on, and then you leave it on for about 30 minutes, and then you wipe it away. What I have found that if you have multiple coats of varnish on the teak, one application of this is not going to take off all the layers of the varnish. You'll have to do it multiple times. What I've also found is that some of the varnish will still be in the grain when you use this, in the grain of the wood. And you'll have to use some sandpaper, and maybe relatively coarse sandpaper, to get the rest of the varnish out of the grain of wood. So the thing that I've been using for a number of years is heat. And you get a heat gun you can get a heat gun from Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever hardware store, and maybe $40 is what I spent on the heat gun. And I set it at a setting that is not much hotter than a hair dryer. If you have it too hot, you risk doing a couple of things. One, you could cause damage to your fiberglass or whatever the surrounding surface is that your teak is on. And the other is that you can burn the teak. Literally, it'll turn black. But I have it down on a setting that is not that hot. And when I do some of the varnish, I literally have the teak in my hands. Like when I do the transom seat or the bow seat, I take the individual pieces of teak off the bow seat and off the transom seat, and I'm literally holding one end of the teak when I'm heating it up. And I'll do little portions of the teak at a time, and then once you can see it starting to get hot and bubble a little bit, then I'll use a plastic scraper to scrape the varnish off. I like that. I don't lose teak by sanding. I don't have to use a chemical that I think is either very toxic, or in this case less toxic, but probably not as effective as some other things. So I've had a lot of luck using a heat gun, and I've used it for not only the teak that's on my bow and transom seats, but I've also used it on the trim that we've been working on. the trim that's on the starboard and port side. And even though that's a small, narrow teak, that teak is very narrow. The way the heat gun is designed, at least this particular one, the fitting on it is very narrow. So you're really able to focus the heat in a very narrow strip. In addition to that, I have the tape that is on each side of the trim. So that gives the fiberglass some protection too. But like I said, I have it down on low. You know, depending on which one you might use, you'll have to play with the settings, but you just want it hot enough to loosen up the varnish and not too hot that you'll either burn the surrounding surface like fiberglass or burn the teak itself. Ideally, you stay on top of your varnish on your teak where you don't have to go down to bare wood. Going down to bare wood is really time consuming, not very fun. If you put a couple of layers of varnish on every 6 months, I find that you stay on top of it. You don't have to go down to the bare wood, and it looks good year round. So the difficult part is you're looking at the varnish on the boat and it looks good, but you don't really want to do work to it. You don't think it needs work. But if it's been 6 months since you put a few coats of varnish on, even though the varnish looks good and it's intact, it's not peeling in any places, it's not coming off at all, it's time to put a couple more coats on, at least 3 coats on. You know, the moral of the story is once you start varnishing teak on your boat, you kind of need a schedule, you know, every 6 months. And it depends on where you live, I guess, how hot it is in the summer, whether or not you have the teak covered. Teak that's covered, that doesn't get sunlight on it, lasts longer. It doesn't need varnishing as quickly or as soon as teak that is exposed to the sun. But like I said, the moral of the story is stay on top of it. Have a schedule to put the varnish on. Don't let the varnish go where it's coming up in places where you can't really varnish it and it look, you know, the way it should look. You have to take it all the way to the bare wood. That will be incredibly time consuming and not something you're going to enjoy doing. So you just want to stay on top of it. Like I said, this time, because the teak was in good shape, we only used 100 weight sandpaper initially just to kind of clean it up. Then I used 400 weight sandpaper, and then I put a coat of varnish on. Then I used the 400 weight sandpaper again, and then put another coat of varnish on, and just using the 400 weight sandpaper between each coat of varnish. But you know, I want to say, you know, kind of my philosophy behind, you know, this kind of do-it-yourself work is that, you know, I'm not an expert, and I'm sure that experts will see the work that I do, and there's things that they're going to find wrong with it, you know. And that's fine. You don't have to be an expert to take on projects like this. And I think my teak on this boat looks good, and it's looked good for, you know, the entire time that I've been doing it, which is, you know, almost 18 years. And it would have cost me at least probably $1,500 a year to have somebody do the teak for me. So for 18 years, I've saved a lot of money by doing the teak myself. You don't have to be a professional, and I don't pretend to be a professional, but I'm proud of the work I do on the teak. I think it looks good. And what I encourage you to do is don't think you have to be an expert before you try to do something. You know, that, oh, I can't do it perfectly, I can't do it as good as a professional. You know, a lot of the work that you do because you care more than somebody else would that you're paying to do it, you'll actually do a really great job. It might take you longer than it would take a professional, but because you care about what you're doing and it's your boat or it's your whatever it is, you'll probably do a really good job once you kind of learn the ins and outs and the tricks of doing things like that. So, you know, I wax the boat myself, the hull, the deck, the stainless steel, and my kids have helped me do that over the years. And we've saved, you know, probably $1,500 a year doing that as well over 18 years, which is a lot of money. Of Could somebody else maybe do a better job? Yeah, I'm sure an expert could, and they would probably get it done a lot faster than I would. But I've saved the money, and I take pride in the work that I've done, and you kind of feel more connected to something when you're actually doing work on it yourself. You have more pride in it, and you feel, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just kind of a nice feeling that you work on your own stuff, and you're kind of more connected to it versus paying somebody else to do it. And then a lot of times when you pay somebody to do it, they don't do a good job, and you have that frustration of not only spending money but not having a good job at the end of the day. So I hope you give it a try, and I think that you'll find that you can do a really good job on teak yourself. Thank you for joining me for a little varnish work on the teak, and I hope that I provided some useful information for you for your own do-it-yourself project. And if you like what you saw, give us a thumbs up, and please subscribe. All right? Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.